Hello, everybody. Everyone here, present with us today and online. Bear with me, Regen Farmers Mutual in Victoria. I'd like to welcome you all here today. Today we're talking about the Victorian Carbon Farming Program pilot. And we've also got Landcare Victoria here to talk about their New Futures program as well, and how we might be able to leverage off some of these programs happening in the region. Just before we get started, for those of you in the venue, I'll just point out facilities where you came in. If you need to head that way, help yourself to refreshments as you like. We've also got just some evacuation housekeeping to do. So in the event of an emergency, head straight back out where you came and go left out the doors. If that is inaccessible, then move through to my left, your right of the building through the glass door and head out the exit door out that way. I just want to acknowledge that we're here today as part of a Department of Energy, Environment and Climate Action event and program. And I'd like to just acknowledge that this is a funded program from the department. I just also want to just let everybody know that we are recording the session today as well. So if you do want to go back and just get any more details around it, or if you'd like to share it with others, then that will be available for all registrants. So an email will go out. Great. So who have we got in the room today speaking? So you know me. We've also got a few more that you'll get to know. So we've got Andrew Ward, or Wardy, Director of Regen Farmers Mutual, with us today. We've got the Acting CEO of Landcare Victoria Inc., Claire Hetzel. And we've also got the Project Manager for the New Futures program, Anthony Gallagher, with us today as well. All of those faces you'll see, or bodies if you're out here. Just to finish off, there will be a Q&A afterwards for the people online. If you can pop any questions that you might have in the chat, we will then facilitate that discussion and get answers out online and also in the room. So logistically, that might be a bit tricky, but we'll get there and we'll make sure everybody gets the information that they need. Okay, let's get into it, shall we? If I move into okay, wonderful. So just to begin the proceedings, Regen Farmers Mutual acknowledges the traditional owners and custodians on the land on which we live and we work. For us today, that's the Dja Dja Wurrung people. We acknowledge and admire the rich living cultures, traditions and connections of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Island people and their intrinsic link and connection to land and place, and the significant contribution that traditional owners have made to managing and caring country for thousands of years. I'd also like to extend that respect to elders and leaders, past and present, and encourage and support those that are emerging for the contributions that they've made, that they will make, and they continue to make. So just to introduce people to the session today and give you a bit of information about what we're going to talk about, or a bit of an agenda. So we'll just start off with an introduction to Regen Farmers Mutual and what the organisation is about. We'll then pass the clicker to Anthony from Landcare Victoria to talk through the New Futures project. And then you'll come back to me just to talk through the Victorian Carbon Farming Program pilot. I need to get that right. That's a bit of a mouthful. We'll then move into a bit of a discussion around additionality. So looking at opportunities that the Vcfp and the New Futures can provide on a landscape scale and how that might tie into other projects or other things that interest groups are doing around the area. And that might include stacking. It might include large landscape sort of transactions. It might also include aggregation on a community level and leveraging projects for other funding. We'll then move into a facilitated Q&A and then we'll close off the event. I'll introduce everybody to Andrew Ward, Director of Regen Farmers Mutual, and pass the baton to him to give everyone an introduction to Regen Farmers.
Thanks,
There you
Dave.
go, Wardy.
Hello, everyone. It's a bit weird having this hybrid kind of online, offline event, so please bear with me. I'll try and make it quick, and I'll try and keep some energy about it so that everybody can enjoy it. You've probably gathered from the logo, from the booking form, we're Regen Farmers Mutual. A mutual is different to a corporation in that it's a company limited by guarantee. Each member owns it equally and democratically. So you don't get the same things as you might in a levied organisation where the bigger organisations in an industry pay the most levies and get the most voice. Fundamentally, the mutual's here because farmers recognised a need when interfacing with the environmental markets, which are new and emerging and are converging with agricultural markets. They needed somebody that was in their corner, that they could trust, that helped aggregate their collective power. And so the mutual came about for that. So when we talk about, member benefit, we're not using that term like a marketing gimmick. It's literally baked into the 10 principles that are in the constitution of the company limited by guarantee that each of our members equally owns. When you are collectively the farmers, as Mutual is, it means that we can work well with the well-aligned. So we can work fairly easily with governments and NGOs and organisations like Landcare because we represent farmers' interests without the concern that people are taking a cut out between farmers and those who want to support farmers. Additionally, it means we can be open source and transparent. So we don't sign non-disclosure agreements and things like that, which enables us to be able to share what's happening as we're learning with our members. And it means that we use different tools instead of power and hierarchy and titles. It's all about co-design and governance and working with the people who understand about that particular problem. As a mutual, there's no way for myself and Rowan and Luke, who are the employees, to be good at everything. But what we can do is facilitate and do co-design. So for farmers, we hold their hand through, a lot of farmers are skeptical of a person hopping up on stage and talking about carbon. They've kind of got the allergic reaction of, oh dear, what's this person trying to sell me today? By being a mutual, we're not just trying to work out what a carbon project could go on your farm is. Instead, we want to better understand what are the opportunities that you can get involved with individually and collectively that make sense from an environmental and an economic perspective. So we help you, first of all, identify those opportunities, invest in those projects on farms. So that might be the upfront costs of establishing an ERF project. We recognise that you'll want to verify the outcomes that are happening over time. And that might be so that you can report to your supply chain, or equally, it might be so you can deliver on your compliance requirements with the Clean Energy Regulator. And that all enables you to sell into markets. Loosely described, markets could be from the biodiversity space to the carbon space to the commodities you're producing. Want to talk about how not just at the grand scale of the Regen Farmers Mutual, but also at the local scale, me as in a farmer needs we. We need more than just what we can do on our farm if we're to have a material impact on environment. If you're talking about biodiversity, you've got to be talking about habitat range and coordination of the landscape. What you do on your own farm is equivalent to an island, and biodiversity islands are better than nothing, but biodiversity corridors are much better. If in Australia, our biggest environmental consideration should be around water, we're the driest, hottest, and increasingly warming country on the planet. And our hydrological cycles need to be at scale to make a material difference. So if you're doing something to prevent flood or drought, you've really got to be working in the 15% or more of the landscape's surface area. If you're doing something at less than that scale within a catchment, you're not going to have a material impact on flood or drought. And once you get to 15%, it's much better to be 16 to 95, maybe 100% of a catchment coordinated so that you can do hydrological interventions that have a material impact. Now, it's not just the materiality of the environmental outcome that comes from working together. Working together, you can reduce the shared costs of a transaction by dividing them by the number of people involved. You also enable peer-to-peer learning and peer-to-peer MVR, measurement, verification, and reporting. You can't stand up there with as much credibility going, I'm doing the right thing, as your neighbour looking at your property and verifying that the outcomes you're claiming are true. So we enable peer-to-peer learning, but also peer-to-peer proof of claims is enabled by working together. And of course, if you're all working together, whether that's in a commodity or in a landscape, you're improving the negotiating power because you're giving yourself the sort of institutional scale to deal with banks, to deal with corporates, to deal with supply chains. When it's a large organization against a single farmer, the information asymmetry, the power asymmetry, the financial asymmetry really plays against farmers. And we've seen that in the last 70 years, the share of farm income from food has never increased. And that, in my view, is to do with the asymmetry around information and power. And the mutual offers an opportunity to the 97,000 farmers in Australia that earn more than 50,000 a year, but less than 2 million a year from their agricultural output. The ones that earn more than 2 million a year can probably afford to bring in the expertise, recruit the expertise, might be sophisticated enough to do projects on their own. But for the majority of small and medium-sized farmers, me needs we at a very practical, very material level for environmental outcome, and ultimately so that they get the best possible deal. So what does working with a group look like? You're already probably sick of hearing from me, so I'm going to, for the next 2 minutes, hand the mic over to Andy Ferrier.
I'm Andrew Ferrier. This is Property Mallow. I've been here since 1992 and
Can you guys hear
converted it from just raw merino sheep into organic lamb production. And in doing that, I've become really interested in biodiversity and the health of the landscape. I've now become interested in what regen farmers can offer us as a group and as a district. So if we've got, say, 8 properties in the pilot group that we're working with now, so they're like little stepping stones in the district. So we've got them and we'll map them and we'll put them together, but the idea is then to expand that out. Development and the benefit for the environment that we can do with that is just unbelievable. There's hotspots of these biodiversity threatened species areas here. To try to get some connectivity is just going to be so important. So back in the early 1990s, we put together a group called the Traprock Wool Association, and that was put together when the wool industry was falling apart. That group, Traprock Group as it's called now, is still in existence, and it's got over 60 members, active members in there, and it's what it's given the landholders is confidence to be part of a project like this. So as a group, We've been talking to SQL, they're the local NRM group, and we're dealing, through regen farmers, and we've been looking for markets because we know we've got the product here. We've got a heap of product, but we need to be able to assess it, we need to be able to monitor it, we need to be able to verify what we've got, report on all that, and then sell it. Different ones here, these grasses, there's a little daisy. So yeah, that's just part of the assessment process, and it's quite comprehensive, but it's what we're looking to do in the future.
So Andy is bloody amazing farmer on the Trap Rock in Queensland, and part of our first landscape impact program that we ran. Danny, not able to move forward, mate. There we go. So after our first successful landscape impact program in the Trap Rock in Queensland, which ran from basically September last year through to March and early April this year, we've been able to secure 9 funded programs, 4 in New South Wales, 4 in Victoria, and 1 in Tasmania, bringing us to 10 landscape impact programs that we've already got underway and funded. Ultimately, the Mutual wants to see those land impact programs happen in 100 or more landscapes around Australia. So what is a landscape impact program? This is the main way with which we engage with members and farmers. And it takes farmers in a region through a process to identify what is it that they can do individually and collectively to make an economic and an environmental outcome. So in the Trap Rock, it was around boxgum grassy woodlands. This provides the opportunity for farmers to protect and restore that threatened ecological community, which enables a habitat for koala, quolls, region honeyeaters, swift parrots, a whole bunch of the species that are on our threatened species list. So at an environmental level, that's the profit that we're looking for. At an economic level, we're looking at that well-managed open native woodland like boxgum grassy woodlands, and farmers are showing us that this is where they're having their lambing in the Trap Rock at the moment. It's got a right mix of coverage to prevent hawks and predators from taking lambs. It's got more than 20 native species of grass interspersed with trees, up to 20-30% of tree cover. And what that enables in the Trap Rock, which is notoriously shit ground, right? It's called the Trap Rock for a reason, is the cycling of nutrients. So the ewes, as they're feeding their lambs at that critical stage of development, this is the pasture where the farmers are putting their lambs to give them the best possible start. So protecting and restoring boxgum grassy woodlands, far from taking away from the productivity and the economic return for farmers, actually aligns a biodiversity outcome and a productivity outcome. And that for us is our definition of regen farmers, of a regenerative agricultural landscape. So we've been able to take this project with Trap Rock, and we're now working with ANU and various others to see whether we can replicate the success we've had there all down the western fall of the Great Dividing Range from southern Queensland through New South Wales to Victoria. Potentially there's 50 million hectares of what were once native woodlands that could be protected and restored and create this dual economic and environmental outcome. Now, when we're working in Western Murray, a mid-river delta, or we're working here in around Castlemaine in the North Central CMA, the solution that works for those farmers will be determined as we co-design over the 20-week program of a landscape impact program. So we typically take 10 farmers through the pilot stage with a working group of 5. And that enables us to get to enough scale to make it economic and to demonstrate how the project would work. But ultimately, you want that 10 to grow to 20, 30, 40, 100 in a region. And we want to do that in 10 regions that are funded, but ultimately 100 regions across Australia. And that'll get us to 10,000 farmers. So how does the Landscape Impact Program work? I'll have Anthony from Landcare Victoria talk about how it will work here in North Central CMA. But broadly speaking, there's a kickoff. Those 10 pilot farmers get a carbon emissions estimate for their farm, which helps us kind of understand a typical profile in terms of emissions for farms in a region. Then we also do a carbon and biodiversity opportunity finder for those 10 farms. The data from those pilot 10, plus the knowledge around the working team, gets put into a mapping session, a co-design session 1, where we also look at the other landholders. Where are the state parks, the national parks, the state forests, the traditional owners, the local government council lands, the Crown lands, the CMA? Where are the lands that the farmers don't control that also need to be coordinated? Because if you're talking about things like feral animal control, deer control, there's no point in controlling it on farms if the national parks and the state forests and the Crown lands aren't also being looked after. So there's a real reason to get a map out in session 1 and look at the landscape from a coordinated perspective to kind of understand, how do you make environmental interventions that matter? The second session, then we go on a field trip. So we have a thesis that we want to test. It might be protecting and restoring box gum grassy woodlands. It might be building soil health. It might be whatever comes out of the process. But you go into the field and you test whether that exists in this location, whether you've got like an exemplar that you're aiming for. Then you take your farmer-derived intervention that you can see in the landscape and you test it with various investors. So that means the supply chains, it means the banks, it means the philanthropic and impact capital, and it means the safeguard and offset buyers who are interested in different outcomes depending on who they are. And you'll end up with a stacked investment. So you might end up with something in carbon for an offset market. You might need something for the supply chain in terms of sustainability reporting. You might need something that goes towards WWF or farming FRRR's sort of social impacts. Whatever the impacts are that people are buying that your group can deliver, you want to be able to get feedback from them about what it is they're after and what you can provide so that you can start to negotiate that. And then it's iterate until session 3, when you can launch an open transaction with the first 10 farmers that then enables the next 10 and the next 10 and the next 10 to come in, until over time and over the landscape, you're involving more and more farmers. Who's involved? You've got a working team of 5, pilot 10 farmers. Typically, those farmers belong to a group like a land care group. They also belong in an NRM that's federally funded and responsible for, usually has fantastic insights, and experts and consultants in that local area who understand that context and can help the farmers.
How's everyone going? All right. Yep. Great. Okay. I'm going to try and make this as exciting as I can. I will warn people, this is the kind of a pretty significant portion of the presentation today. It's also very technical, and I've tried to tech it down a little bit and make it more digestible, but there are some tech bits in it. So bear with me. If I'm waffling, one of you out there, just give me the heave ho. So this section we've devoted to the Victorian Carbon Farming Program pilot. So So we'll just move you through a bit of an overview of the program. What we've got here, what you can see here is the North Central CMA catchment, in which the pilot program is rolling out over the next 18 months. So the program was developed to assist the state government in reducing or hitting its goal of net zero by 2045. And to do that, what the government have done is provide incentives in establishing some high value tree plantings across this area with the ambition to roll this out across the state. So this catchment is the kind of guinea pig, and then hopefully in the next kind of 18 or within the next 18 months, this will start to roll out statewide. The current contribution is $3 million for the pilot, and 15 to 18 million overall. Sorry, I should know that. Across or statewide for the first tranche of funding. It involves a suite of registered or qualified or experienced project managers and consultants, one of which is Regen Farmers Mutual, and there are three others. Wood for Good, who also operate in this region, Tree Project, which Landcare people out there might know as the volunteer growing program that has just closed up, I think, this week. And thank you, Wardy, Greening Australia. So in order to create a program or a project, you need to partner with us to do that. The program will be delivered alongside Bushbank, but it's not strictly a biodiversity program. So anything to do with a strict biodiversity program must go through Bushbank. This particular program favours projects that provide strategic importance or assets for productivity enterprises. So that is farming. So we're relying on, this is incentivising farmers and farming operations to put trees in the ground. To be part of the project or run a project out, any eligible landholder will need to partner with us in order to create a project or an application for a project, which then goes to the assessment panel, and then the assessment panel makes a decision according to that. Permanence for landowners and for the RPA is a period of 10 years. So conventionally in a registered project, you're looking at 25, 50 or 100 years. This has been scaled back to a 10-year permanence period. As I say to a lot of people look at that and get a bit worried about that. Having come from the Landcare industry, I often say I've never met a farmer or stepped foot on a farm who put trees in the ground 10 years ago and wants to rip them out. Generally, they want to put more in. So I still have confidence that that's a pretty good time period to establish something. So to begin with, this is broken up into two phases. The first phase is what we're in at the moment. It's an outreach phase. So getting information out, starting to understand what sort of projects might be out there or potential projects, and starting to look to partner with groups or landholders in order to get these things running. So this involves advocacy and support for the program and encouraging or providing trust to landholders that the program is going in the right direction. And that they will be supported in delivering anything that they choose to deliver. It also includes outreach activities and engagement plans. So this event is part of that. And then the next phase is providing specialist knowledge and support in the pilot area, which we're going to do through a bunch of this stuff. So our town hall event tonight, but largely through an opportunity assessment. So what we want to do is take 9 to 12 opportunity assessments across 3 groups in the region. And to do that, we need to partner with Landcare networks, we need to partner with farm interest groups, and people who are really interested and invested in these types of projects. To run, essentially, we're running 3 mini pilots in the region to set the project up for success moving forward and start to get projects ready to be delivered or start to be designed by kind of the start of 2024. So while we do that, we will then create a webinar series so 3 webinar series will also be delivered, and that will share that information that we kind of collect with those groups out to the broader audience in order to then start to scale that throughout the region and through the state. So As part of the pilot, we're actually trying to pilot the process as well, which refers to both what Wardy and Anthony have spoken about. And then we're going to share the learning. So really common, as it's come up earlier in the event, we're keen to share those more broadly across anybody who might be interested in this project. So phase two will then, after that outreach phase, and we're kind of doing it already, but phase two involves the project development. So that is undertaking partnerships and developing projects to get trees in the ground, in essence. So in order to do that, we need to enable the design, implementation, delivery of these tree growing processes. So there's a process prior to getting anything in the ground that we need to make sure is robust enough to handle the 10 years, be set up for success, but also contribute to those strategies and those guidelines. Part of that is identifying landowners to design and develop proposals and identify groups in which we can scale against. So ideally, we don't want isolated landholders. We want to create an aggregated scale or a landscape scale type transaction or project that might involve neighbours, it might involve a land care group, it might involve a network down the track as we start to move through this. That said, it doesn't have to be a single stage process. We might actually look at that for the long term and bring 3 in and then stagger that and start to develop landscape type priorities around a project like that. Again, that's where the New Futures project can come in and we can start to leverage off some of these other opportunities in order to move a project a little bit further down the line or set it up with further success. Proposals will be considered in terms of extent, as far as what additional value might come from that project. So again, moving into opportunities like the New Futures project, or it might be generating timber or for harvest type timber products. It might be offsetting emissions associated with the farm or with the enterprise. So being able to create those emission accounts and that emissions reductions on farm. It might be that producing credits to move into the carbon credit market, or setting yourself up for a registered project. Alternatively, there might be other co-benefits related to that. So there might be investment, some kind of community investment or corporate investment that we might be able to leverage out of a project such as this, similar to the Trap Rock project. As far as eligibility goes at the moment, we're looking for, or you must be the freehold owner of that land within the North Central CMA region. So it can only be on private land. All owners, so if the land or if the freehold is under some kind of partnership, all owners must agree to the conditions and be co-signs. So as far as maybe succession planning goes or any of that sort of stuff, we really need to keep that in mind as well for the lifetime of the project. You must have an aggregated annual turnover of less than $3 million. This is the technical part. Not have been convicted of a crime, not be a criminal, and you need to partner with one of us, as stated. As far as project size goes, there's no necessary minimum project size, but there is a maximum size of 100 hectares, and above 50 hectares, there are other things that might need to be addressed within the plan. So things like a more detailed business plan, but also over 50 hectares, you need to establish a justification as to why this investment is required for a project like that, and why it maybe can't go directly to an ERF project or be registered directly. As far as the makeup of a project, plantings can be non-contiguous, but they need to be 0.2 of a hectare or no less than 0.2 of a hectare and a minimum of 10 metres. We're actually recommending much more than that as advisors, and we're certainly recommending that we move out to between 30 and 50 metres in terms of any type of tree project, and that's in line with the ANU guidelines that have been around. They were re-released. We'll grab questions afterwards. Thanks, Dean. Permanence period of 10 years, as stated, and both the landholder and us as RPAs need to commit to that 10 years. So that support is embedded in the project from day one for the lifetime of the project. So just a little bit of information just about management requirements here. The project is pretty non-prescriptive in terms of management regimes and species type inclusions. What I will say there is it does rely on full CAM modelling. So there are aspects of these programs that don't require Indigenous plantings or particular EVC type plantings. But it does take a different stream that we will need to plan for if that is the route that is chosen to go down. It does support implementation of silviculture regimes and also takes into account site conditions and good practice around broader kind of farming and agricultural processes. So part of that means, looking at the way in which the land is managed or the project is managed, but also giving that farm benefit or that enterprise benefit. Now, when we talk about, again, technical warning here, but the guidelines and what we need to design for are two particular things, forest cover and canopy cover, and they are directly linked to the federal modelling and to the full CAM modelling as well, or the carbon methodologies. So there is a little bit of that has been embedded in this program. Plantings need to be able to achieve forest cover to a 20% cover at 2 metres high, which is quite standard. So we need to design for that. We also, it's also suggested that more plantings are put in and then thinning or other kind of management is undertaken in order to do that. When we talk about crown cover or forest cover, that is the amount of land covered by the outer edges of a tree or a group of trees. So yeah, there are pretty rigid kind of auditing processes throughout the project that need to atone for this. And this is just an example of how you might go about that or how the design might look. And then this is a spatial example of what that might look like. So when we take in our 20%, we need to make sure that we've got that contiguous cover as well. So something like this is what we call a compliant project. Sorry for those online, on your left if you're looking at the screen. And on your right, with one particular, that top kind of right-hand corner or that top corner having died back or had some kind of event go through, that is deemed as a non-compliant. So as far as management goes, throughout the lifetime of the project, you need to be able to manage for that or be able to look at those signs and continue to audit that. So application process and requirements, it's a 4-step arrangement here, or a 4-step process. What we've got is establishing a landowner and RPA partnership, so having a discussion about what that might look like and what the requirements might be. Part of that we will then develop an application to go to the assessment panel, and that requires moving through a modelling system, so full CAM modelling, also understanding and getting some GIS data and some assessment work done, and then understanding how that project might be delivered and doing a costing around it. We then move into we submit that application, that project plan. We move on to a joint project assessment process. So that is then assessed by a panel, and then we get the outcome about 12 weeks later. Applications are open now, technically, and they're going to run through and close in December 2024, unless the funds are exhausted prior to that. So this is just a rundown of those steps that we covered. So in step 1, we'll develop and we'll implement a plan, and the project will be designed around the implementation of a 10-year lifespan. We'll then submit that, and that'll be signed by us and by the landholder. The project plan then becomes a kind of document or an agreement that is then held with the department about in terms of what's going to be delivered over that 10-year process. And what that plan needs to include is the management regime, so how you're going to manage it, how you're going to implement it, what the full cam modelling looks like. So how we're going to justify that against the current modelling system, and any activities that might be implemented during that lifetime. We also need to do some mapping and some geo-referenced photos, so photo points across the period, and a cash flow model in terms of what that breakup is between all parties and what's costed on the ground versus what that dividend might look like. Step 3, the application gets submitted, and there's then an outcome within 12 weeks, or notification about 12 weeks after the submission. Cool. Moving on to funding, so eligibility and how this is going to be broken up. The upper limit is determined by project size. So as you can see over here, I've got a bit more of a breakdown. There's a maximum rate per hectare allocated for the first 20 hectares of $5,000 per hectare. Then from 21 to 50, it drops to $3,000 per hectare, and then 25 to $2,500 per hectare after 50 hectares. The reason for that is it's indexed around economies of scale. So the bigger the project, the cheaper per hectare it should be to implement. All funding is all determined by a predetermined or formula within the guidelines, and that is directly related to the tonnes of CO2 equivalent per hectare that the project will deliver via the modelling. That multiplied by the stocked carbon price indicated in the guidelines, which is $25 per tonne per tonne of CO2e. So if we do that, we then need to run. Oh yeah. Sorry, before we get there, this is just an indication of project size versus available funding or maximum funding and the rate at which it's calculated. So you can see here, as we get above the 20 hectares, 30 hectares drops down to $4,500 per hectare. And then if we move to 70 hectares, that drops down to $3,643 per hectare. So it's indexed on a per hectare rate as soon as you get past that 20 hectares, and that pushes the price down, per single hectare. So what I've done here, just to give people a bit of an understanding of how the system might work, I've just had a look at, I think I've got about 12 different scenarios that we've had a look at here, utilising the modelling through a couple of carbon estimation tools. So if we look at Sidonia at the top, we've got a 68 hectare property. Total tonnes of CO2 equivalent across the lifetime is 7,200 tonnes. That averages, or that works out to an average of about 10.6 tonnes of CO2 per equivalent per hectare per year. You'll notice the reason for this slide is you'll notice all of these areas are giving us different averages or giving us a different sequestration rate. And what's important here is this is what determines the funding equivalent. So if we move forward and take these areas, confused it. So if we take there we go. So if we take these areas now, we'll take Sidonia again. I've rounded that into just some rounded hectare equivalents. So we've rounded this up to 70 hectares. That means our eligible grant funding, maximum eligible grant funding is $3,600 or thereabouts. Total eligible is $255,000. But then we need to take into account our tonnes of CO2 equivalent that the modelling provides us. So, so this is rather than the 3,643 that you'll see in the eligible grant funding, if we move across to the adjusted funding, and for those in the room, this is this one here. This is how how it gets worked out. So this is, again, technical kind of bit. So what we do here is we multiply the tons of CO2e estimation from the carbon tool. We then multiply that by the stocked carbon price of $25 per tonne, and we come out with $2,650 per hectare of eligible funding within the application. So because that estimation of CO2e is lower than I think it works out to about 15 tonnes to the hectare or thereabouts is that figure. We need to then readjust that. So that's got to come down because it's not creating as many tonnes of CO2e within the project. If we look down at Donald, or actually, no, let's take Serpentine in the red. So Serpentine in the red, we've got 100 hectares at 2.5 tonnes per hectare per year. The eligible funding is $3,300 for a project like that. But if we move across, the adjusted funding is $625 per hectare. So this is just an indication of where we need to be a little bit careful about how about sizes of projects and viability of projects. So again, we need to be able to do that modelling and understand that we're not setting people up to fail in order to do this, or where we might need to leverage other funds. So where we might need to leverage something like the New Futures project or another transaction out of Regen Farmers Mutual to be able to get that dividend up a little bit higher. If we look down the bottom at Bale, we've got a 100 hectare area, but this is actually telling us that, so the modelling tells us that we've got nearly 15 tonnes to the hectare. This is where we need to adjust the project down. So maximum is $3,300 per hectare. If we were to run the numbers, we're actually up at $3,700 per hectare on that estimated tonnes per hectare rate. Okay, so in this instance, our maximum funding is $330,000 for the 100 hectare project. What that means is we need to revise our adjusted funding down to $3,300 per hectare. So to break that down a little bit more and hopefully clarify it a little bit, what I've done here is I've taken that Sidonia, I've taken Rochester, and I've taken Bale on the map here. So if we start from the bottom, Sidonia with a 70 hectare pasture conversion, our total eligibility is $3,643 to the hectare. Our adjusted eligibility comes down to the $2,650 per hectare. So our adjusted eligibility total is about $185,000 for the project. If we move to Rochester in the middle, we've got 3.8 tonnes per hectare per year on 80 hectares of cropping conversion. Our total eligibility is $3,500 to the hectare. That's revised down according to the 3.8 tonnes per year to $950 of eligible funding to the hectare, which brings our project down to $76,000 or total funding, eligible funding. If we look at Bale, as I suggested in the previous slide, we actually need to, at 100 hectares, it's actually worth, when we do the adjustment, it's actually worth $3,700 to the hectare, but we revise that down to $3,300 in order to come into the guidelines. Whew. Okay, great. So hopefully that gives you gives people a bit of an idea. We will move into a bit of a discussion now and some next steps. So just to begin this portion of the presentation, what I will say for people out there and also for people here, if you are interested as a group, there is a QR code there that you can scan to register your group for the outreach program. If you're a project interest, then the project follow that project interest QR code, and we'll get registrations or EOIs through there as well that we can follow up after tonight. So next steps for anybody interested: register yourself, register your group. If you have got neighbours who might be interested here, so we have got a few people coming to us that are forming blocks of maybe 4 or 5. Please do that as well. So you can do that as an individual project interest, or you can do it as an interest group. And yeah, generally just get hold of us and we can kind of talk through anything else that yeah, that might be required. So I'll just open it up now. I just want to bring Wardy into this, and perhaps Claire or Anthony or both of you. How we're going to do that on screen, I'm not quite sure. It might be a usual suspects, line us up on the wall type situation, but we'll see. But Wardy, I might just kick off with you just to talk about additionality and synergies, particularly after what we've kind of spoken about today, and then we'll move into a bit of a discussion.
Sure. So working with within that idea of a landscape, you're wanting to get multiple outcomes. So you don't just want planted trees, for example. You want habitat that comes from those planted trees so that you can improve biodiversity and you can provide a home for endangered species. Now, what we have here in this Victorian carbon farming pilot program, and when you cross that with the New Futures landscape impact program, is the first elements of a stacked transaction. You can get a group working together with the New Futures program. They can get income for planting trees through the Victorian Carbon Farming Project, which assists them but doesn't preclude them from getting into a clean energy regulator project so that they can also get ACCUs, right, over and above the Victorian Carbon Farming Program. Those ACCUs they could retire in order to meet their net zero requirements for their commodity, or they might sell in order to generate cash flow. Now, that's just the start of the stack, working off carbon, which is probably the most mature of the environmental markets. But we know that even by June 30 in 2024, 9 months' time, we will have a lot clearer idea about what biodiversity markets look like globally. By that time, the World Economic Forum auction on biodiversity credits will have happened. We'll also know whether we're going to get a nature repair market in Australia before or after the next election cycle and what flavour that might look like. So starting to work together, starting to put your stack together and allowing time for a maturity of the view about what can we do individually and collectively, and the maturity of the markets. What does carbon expect? What do impact and philanthropic investors expect? What do biodiversity markets expect? What does your supply chain and your bank expect? Starting to understand these is the whole basis, but it's made a lot easier, a lot less stressful financially for farmers, thanks to the opportunity to be involved with the Victorian Carbon Farming Pilot Program. And it's made a lot easier when you're not doing it on your own. You're doing it as part of the group, supported by your land credit group, which is what the Victorian New Futures Program allows for. So that's what's got me excited and why we wanted to bring everybody together in this conversation today, because it's the start of something in North Central CMA that looks like a stacked and aggregated transaction, which looks like it's got government, land care, and the mutual support. So if there were ever sort of the right conditions to establish a landscape-led, farmer-led, government-supported, carbon underwritten project, it's kind of now. So that's my piece to it. Claire, do you or Anthony, would you like to make any comment on the stacking or the value that you see? If you don't, you don't.
I won't, but I guess I just wanted to reiterate, if you're a project, have a chat with your local land care facilitator or your local group. So I think we've really highlighted today the opportunities of the we in this, and that there will be something more that can happen if you do collaborate. That doesn't have to be onerous. So some people think they're going to have to turn up to committee meetings and really dig into the kind of, long stalwart kind of committee component of land care. It doesn't have to be that way. So do reach out if you're not sure where to start. Get in touch with Landcare Victoria.
Were there any questions on that?
Yeah, we've got we'll just move into some questions and stuff. And I know, Dean, I've got you on the list here as well. I will just start off, and those here and online, it might be a bit of a revolving kind of thing, but even Wardy, maybe we can chime in on computers and see how that goes. We'll see what happens. The first question that I do want to address is from Kenneth about using natural capital accounting for farm management. And this came from the Regen Farmers Mutual presentation, or the About presentation. Wardy, I kind of had a crack at that, and the discussion, or the answer was about, I suppose, identifying the best method that was required for the project and for participants. But do you want to elaborate on that a little bit?
Sure. So at the Mutual, we're a bit measurement agnostic, but we see life as a bit of a waterfall. And it goes like, what's somebody wanting to see if they're going to pay you? The customer at the top, and then the government. What do they regulate? What do they want to see? And if you don't show it, you go to prison, right? And then somewhere after you've looked after the customer and you've looked after regulation, then you can start to look at best practice and scientifically compare different methods. But what I've seen a lot is, 2 years ago, every university in Australia had a biodiversity measurement tool in development. And I know from talking to the feds at DQ in Canberra, they had a biodiversity innovation grant that they had only $8 million for, and they thought they'd get like a dozen applications, and they had over 100 applications of biodiversity measurement innovations. And I would make the case that I don't care which innovative biodiversity measurement tool we use, so long as it's something the customers have confidence in and are willing to say, if you show me that, I'll pay for that, and that the regulators are satisfied. Once those two priorities are sorted, we can talk about natural capital accounting versus accounting for nature versus a veg condition assessment versus a bioindicator assessment from birds or from bees or from significant key indicators. So the answer, Danny, will probably not help. We don't care. We care that you can get a value out of whatever activity it is that you're doing, and whatever you need to measure to prove that that activity is achieving its outcomes. That's more important to us than which process. Hopefully, Ken, that helps position where we're at.
Thanks, Wardy. I might it's not really pulling rank because you are higher rank, but maybe I'll revise it and say we do care in the form that we need to make sure that it works for the project and the participant rather than conforming to a particular methodology or accounting method. I'll note you, Paul, but I do want to just give Dean a chance to ask that question or dress me down or similar. I never quite know with you, Dean, but it's always fun.
Just a few thoughts looking through that. Do you happen to have, by chance, a Venn diagram that has the overlap between the different programs and the confluence of those? That would be, because there's a lot in there.
Yeah.
And anyone in this room could regurgitate on including each of you guys.
Yeah.
So if you had something like that on the page, right? Because it's all about communication value of this to other parties.
Yeah. I'll just address that just for our online participants, and then I'll let you keep going. So the question was about having some kind of Venn diagram about all of the information that I just spewed at everybody. The answer to that is not yet. I am working on a 2-pager, which is currently about 6 pages, but I'm still trying to. This is kind of Mark 1 of the distillation, and then I'm hoping to distill that a little bit more through some case studies and a bit of a 2-pager that we can get out. Yeah, great.
Then the next thing is that if you're a shuffle that. What would be terrific to see is some work examples.
Yep.
And there are some, I can point to what I thought was really well done in the past from the federal government. There's a lot of information here, and you can say, again, you can give it to someone as a single, like, 1-page fact sheet that Danny's farm over here, this is what he normally runs, his time poor, his cash poor. So he's really not going to throw money at it. He loves the idea, but he doesn't have time either. He's still busy cleaning up all the doors in his creeks and whatever else.
Yeah.
And the case study, hypothetical case study, basically walk through and you go, okay, that's almost like what I do. I can transpose a few numbers and things in there, and then I get it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So for those online, the question was around getting worked examples and case studies to be able to allow the information to be accessed and a bit more digestible around similar scenarios. That is part of the outreach. So that's the intention of that outreach process in working with those groups and getting those 12 or so case studies together. So what we'll be looking to do is we want to disperse that across the North Central area and work with those groups to understand what their enterprise is, understand what their emissions are, and then provide a series of different options for them using the Regen Farmers Mutual's tools. The main one being the Regen Digital twin platform. So what we hope to end up with is 3 people or 3 individual farms that we can aggregate together into a type of aggregated project, but break them down into their individual components as well and their individual needs, and find the best opportunity or best options for them in terms of the design of it, what it looks like in terms of costing and funding eligibility. Don't do it there because you might get you kind of get less carbon, tons of carbon there rather than doing it there. Looking at all of that sort of stuff, and then being able to distill that down into those particular case studies for people to start to look at. So that's very much the first phase of the project. Yeah.
So the farms that we do a lot of store carbon too, regen. So what's coming down the pipeline, we're also involved in co-design of that land management methodology, which essentially avoids you having to stack these things as independent methodologies, which has a big overhead, cost, time, everything else, but to bring them together as one whole project.
Yeah.
So a lot of issues. Maybe yes, what would be nice to see here and address it is where you have people that are already involved in the carbon project, engineering principles, if they go down that overland pathway, then rather do like they don't want to separate themselves from that, they can actually build on top of that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
To be part of what you're offering here.
Mm-hmm.
That would be beneficial, and I suspect that's something you want to do.
Do you want to answer that for the online community?
Yeah, I'll just recap that for online. So so that was that's, I'm going to call it a statement, Dean, we'll leave it there. Was about integrated stacking. So being able to take what methods and developments or programs that are already happening, and integrating them in without the arduous kind of administration that silos a lot of these projects. I'll start and then I'll probably throw it to Wardy, but absolutely that's what we want to do. So Regen Farmers Mutual is about it's about progression and being able to understand what that progression of regen ag farming is or sustainable farming or whatever label you want to give it. We don't care. That's one thing we really don't care. But it is for us, it's about opening up those opportunities and leveraging against perhaps what's already been done. So there is, and as many people probably out there and in the room know, you can't go backwards. You can't retrospectively, apply for ACCUs or for a carbon project. And that is one thing that continues to come up in terms of feedback. So opportunities that we look at are trying to find some kind of investment or opportunity that will actually pay for some of that front-ended stuff that hasn't been accounted for yet, in order to then progress those methods or those practices on farm and bring them all into a landscape scale type transaction. So what are the good things that you've already done? What benefits are you seeing? Where do you want to go next as part of your entire enterprise? And then what's the future buyer, or what is that future kind of investment? So hopefully that addresses that, and I'll throw it to Wardy.
And Dean, I've been waiting for that integrated farm method with you probably for 12 months now that I've been talking about it coming. I can't wait for it to come. And when it does, it will make carbon projects a lot simpler. We need to make sure that additionality and newness that they're talking about in the nature repair market doesn't conflict with the additionality and newness around the carbon market for a single piece of land. Otherwise, you're saying to farmers, we only care about your carbon outcome or your biodiversity outcome, not both outcomes. That's with or without the integrated method. So that's one point. And the other point is, if somebody in a region already has a carbon project, but they're willing to work with their neighbours and peers in a landscape scale transaction, we actually really welcome that. One of the opportunities in that field trip component of a landscape impact program is to take farmers who are newer on the process to an environment that is a good example of what you can do if you adopted this intervention, or if we collaborated and we made these impacts. And so actually having a leading farmer who's done, say, soil carbon or planting trees in the region is absolutely really helpful to the overall group. And so far from being dissuaded, we would encourage mature carbon projects in. The challenge they might have, depending on how they got into a carbon project, is they may have non-disclosure agreements and conditions put on them by their project developer that actually stops them from sharing their knowledge, the financial model, the methods, what went wrong and what went well with relation to their project because of the way that they might have engaged with a corporate broker in the past. That's been our biggest issue compared to, we're open. We want as many farmers as possible. If they're already on this train, great. But what we've found is a lot of those farmers that were early in signed, really horrible contracts in hindsight that prevented them from even being able to tell horror stories or good stories. There was no transparency around it. And part of our 10 principles is to counteract that and say, we want you to tell your neighbours what's working or not working. Yeah. So hopefully that helps.
Thanks, Morty. A couple of other questions. I'll just address two before I come to you, Paul. Another couple off the chat. Another one from Kenneth was talking about native timbers. I haven't got it here in front of me, but the answer was yes, I agree. And there is a method for that. So just addressing just going back to the guidelines and the project, what we've, I suppose, distilled here is a standing carbon project. So they're biodiversity and standing carbon projects. That's what we do. And I think I can say that's what we do best. There is also another pathway called the For Harvest pathway. And the question was related to the cessation of the native timber industry and where the incentive is to start to grow native timbers privately or on farm. So that's what the For Harvest pathway actually enables. So the guidelines do, in short, the guidelines address that. If anybody is interested in a harvesting type project, we think that can actually be included in an aggregated model. We just need to be able to account for that and justify it and be able to, work around that. But there are also other ways and another kind of indexed system for the For Harvest arrangement, which actually gives you a little bit more per hectare. Because of the requirements around pruning and the kind of more excessive management requirements. So there is, the guidelines do establish that, Kenneth, and for those others that are interested out there. And I'm happy to take any calls or questions about that offline if you are interested. I'll also, while we're here, I'll just address Andrew's question or comment about why it's tree focused, and I know Wardy addressed that in the chat as well. What I will say here is that's what this project is. So it's about trees in the ground, whether they're for harvest or whether they're for enterprise benefit. And there are other projects available that do look at other ROIs that AgVic are looking into, such as the carbon accounting models and moving people to carbon accounting within their current structures, understanding their emissions and being able to reduce those. There's a lot of feed and methane reduction programs out there as well. And there's also some farm transition type programs too. So it's not that they're not being addressed; they're just not being addressed in this particular program. This is about the benefit of biodiversity, trees in the ground, and what that can do for farms and co-benefit around the enterprise.
I'll jump in there for a second.
Yep.
And just not trying to be cynical, but just practical, because government spends our money collectively as taxpayers. They always prefer to invest in something that they can point to and say, this is what we produced. So soil carbon is harder to show this is what we produced. But if you've paid for, as the Victorian or the federal or the New South Wales government's the same, if you paid for trees, 5 years later, you should be able to point to a map that shows the trees, and you've got a level of certainty and confidence on the investment. And so governments favour things they can point to. And so the outcomes that are harder to visualise, harder to see, harder to record, they'll tend to come from less conservative sources than government.
Right. Thanks, Wardy. I'm going to throw to Paul. Paul had a question.
Thanks, Dee. Given this is a pilot project, I'm assuming that you guys are open to examination of the structure and principles behind doing this. We want to learn on it, and as time goes on, we want to adapt and get better at doing stuff. So I'm sort of interested in risk management and legacy issues that ultimately, as I understand it, we're trying to do this for the long haul. We want to sequester carbon and make sure that carbon stays locked up and sequestered for as long as possible. That's why have the kind of impacts on impacts. If a carbon that we lock up in the short term in trees ends up being lost through removal of that vegetation by the landholders in due course, or other processes, i.e. senescence. In other words, the plantation dies after 20, 30 years, it's not replaced, it's not self-replacing. So in the end, our investment's short term. And I'm sort of interested in how we can structure this so that we get long-term results.
It's a lot in that, Paul. I will. So, just to distill that for our online participants, the question was around this being a pilot, wanting it to be better, and looking at the principles of the legacy over the longer term, and just being able to kind of look at the risk mitigation around that and the climate impacts, or perhaps clearing impacts or land management impacts that we might see further down the line in 20, 30, 40 years. Did I get that? Yep, great. I'll put my answering hat on. I'll just preface this with, yes, we do. We absolutely want to start to look at that. But I also just want to point out that we haven't written the guidelines either. So yeah, yeah, for others. But absolutely, yeah, we're really interested in that. I think from our point of view, the kind of outcome that we're looking for is that longevity. Like, we want them to be there forever, but we also want that management style that precludes that kind of senescence or builds upon it. So you're absolutely right. Like, if we take the two bones of this method and the outcomes of 2 meters high, 20% cover, yeah, you can smash in a whole lot of acacias, but we know that they're going to die, in 7 to 12 years, right? And we end up with nothing again. So that's on us to deliver that kind of more perpetual type design. I think it's not stated in the guidelines, but I would hope that good design, and where we're coming from, will actually, we would expect to see some natural recruitment in those areas as well, providing the management was right, and that they don't get, nobody goes over it with a, D7 or something. So the longevity is probably in that kind of, that's, well, don't like the term, but in that stacking. So looking for other, levers to pull in terms of making them a little bit more long term. And that's actually what, if we look at the bones of this project, that's what it's there for. So the project has been, put together as an incentivized scheme for landholders to look at other avenues, to kind of stack on top of this. So fundamentally, the department and the government have understand that the smaller holdings in Victoria can be really restrictive in federally listed projects or federally registered projects, and they need a little bit more help to get off the ground. And that's what this is about. So our job is to make sure that they're designed well, that we've got the right people that are doing them for the right reasons. We know that if your neighbours are involved, then all of a sudden it becomes a project like this. It drives a little bit more ownership around things like that. But we also need to start to look for other options that we can lever off. But I will also say, again, being in a land care kind of industry, and I know you're there too, is, it's very rare to meet a landholder that wants to rip their trees out after 10 years. They come to us and say, we want more. So we want to rely on that as well. Yeah. Yeah. Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
I guess my query around let's start with this program.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you said, well, it was quite a reason.
Yeah.
But then we also talked about
yeah.
And then when you look at figures and we stood over
yeah.
it seems like this is no trust much to it. So my concern is that we're in the state of other doesn't have
yeah.
I love to see trees in the ground, and you have application for that say which trees. I guess program, but challenging themselves and putting lots of arguments upon the issue.
Yeah.
Not, one example, but two. long-term in the industry. So I guess I'm just looking at how who determines which way that.
Yeah, great. Yeah, a really good question. So just for our online folks, the question was around the difference between bushbank and the carbon farming pilot, and where how you determine which is which. It's very clear as far as the Vcfp goes that it must be part of an enterprise. So it must be for farming assets and to diversify that farming asset. So whether that's in for harvest or whether that's around stock management and shelter belts or riparian buffers. So the test for us is it part of a greater farming enterprise and looking at those benefits? If it's a tick, okay, we can move down that path and we'll develop a program, a project. Is it a lifestyle block that people have got that they don't rely on enterprise or money, cash coming in? If that is the case, then we need to push that to bushbank. So this is very firmly based in an incentivized scheme to get landholders either reducing their emissions internally or moving into other stackable kind of options like the carbon market, like so ERF projects or biodiversity projects or similar, or for harvest projects. So I suppose the short of that is, has it got a carbon accounting or a enterprise attached? If the answer is yes, it's this program. If the answer is no, it's probably a bushbank program. Yep.
Sorry, I don't think bushbanks will be that simple.
No, but yeah.
We don't want to understate that because it's driven.
Yeah.
Yeah, so sorry. This idea of checking is great. That's when trees taking carbon. I'm thinking it's Gareth's government. That's good to that.
Yeah. The comment there was just about the availability of bushbank and being able to get into that. I'm not at all versed on bushbank, so I can't. I won't comment on that, but I do take the point that there's probably a few more administrative things around that sort of agreement than there is perhaps this one. Yeah. I will just. I've got what I do have one somewhere. Is the question for me, or is it? Can I throw it to someone else?
It's probably on one of those slides.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. All right.
But I guess it was in relation, like you showed different locations come up with the theme.
Yep.
And that I guess is based on.
Yep.
I just wondered why, like, it made a big, like, maybe it is why is there
Yes, there is, and no, there's not. That was me trying to distill a few examples that didn't create another 10 slides. So yeah, so there will be more of that in the outreach and probably a little bit more information to come out around that. So the question, sorry, those online, the question was about the examples given and around tons of CO2 equivalent and why they weren't the same across the board. Yeah, the reason was I just wanted to give a bit of an idea of different sizes to be able to provide a better indication of the index system and also the modelling system around tonnes per hectare to see how that adjustment looked. So within that, I looked at a couple of different sizes and a couple of different modelling scenarios in different areas in order to just provide a bit of a scattergun type approach of the district, but also what people might be looking for if they've got 20 hectares or if they've got 50 hectares or if they're looking for 100 hectares. So yeah.
So does that price index change?
Yeah. So the follow-up question was about species choice. So the guidelines do state that they're not super prescriptive, but they are modelled on the full cam system. And part of the full cam system does, and the methodologies around that, gives you a certain prescriptive kind of planting. So yes, it does a bit, but also then the for harvest type project has a higher indexing rate. So and a completely different species, suite available. So the answer to that is yes, it will change. How much? How long is a piece of string? Kind of thing. Yeah. So that's where we're starting to get into the project planning and being able to kind of distill that down into what's required there. Yeah. Great. There's one question that I do want to get to from Olivia. Where are you, Olivia? So the question was around productivity of land and rainfall varying across the region, and that farms in the south are smaller, and to exclude 20 hectare, anything greater than 20 hectares. I think, Olivia, if you're still there, I might be getting this wrong, but will be a stretch. So is there consideration given to sizes and potential carbon stock from higher rainfall and soil type? The answer to all of that is yes. So the modelling will determine that for us. And then we can run that through the feasibility kind of structure that we've created. And also the kind of, how that marries up with tons of CO2. So we are kind of running through some benchmarking at the moment. Olivia, you and I have had some conversations, and I'm happy to take those offline. But largely, we do recognise that, as you could see in that map, that the carbon harvest is going to directly impact whether it's a viable project or whether it's not a viable project. But also the hectare rate is also going to determine how viable that project is, not just for us, but for the landholder. And that's what we want. That's absolutely part of what we need to kind of keep in mind in terms of integrity. So Regen Farmers was built on not taking all the money. And so we don't want to do that. We want to make sure that we're not setting landholders up to fail. And also not taking a higher dividend than we need to in order to just provide a landholder with the feel-good factor. So we need to be really realistic about that, and that perhaps that's around aggregation or bringing others in so that we can aggregate a transaction or create some kind of landscape impact around that. So there's a lot in it. It is very detailed, but we hope to identify some of that in the case studies as well.
Olivia, on that point, that map of North Central CMA had a full cam output of, I thought the lowest was about 2.5 and the highest was north of 14 tons of carbon equivalent. So what's that, like a 5 to 7 factor difference in the yield of carbon for a single hectare, depending where you are in North Central CMA. And then the other thing I would say is, until about 2 years ago, the federal government wasn't even sure that we had a climate crisis or believed in climate change and environment. So the ERF, the main instrument with which we have to decarbonise in Australia, it really wasn't built for mass adoption. It certainly wasn't built for smaller land sizes. So one of the challenges and opportunities for the mutual is to be able to help farmers or landholders that are smaller than is necessary on their own to be able to get into a project, to aggregate and get into a project. And the same challenges you have here in North Central CMA are present in the Northern Rivers, New South Wales, and are present pretty much all up and down the eastern fall of the Great Dividing Range. So we are very attuned to the fact that we need to engage with lots of small landholders, take parcels collectively, aggregate them up, and then be able to fit with the instruments that we have here in Australia And then in order to have faith that your bit of the overall is going to be fairly rewarded and you'll be able as an individual to make some money from that, you've got to have something like a mutual, which needs to keep the lights on, but has no need to make an accelerated return to pay shareholders risk capital. And so the mutual will help aggregate smaller landholders and distribute it without a great big tax on whatever is earned. But we're dealing with lots of small is hard to make work in the markets that we've got. And the mutual is trying at the moment to work out how to do that aggregation of lots of small. And probably we'll have some decent answers by early 2024. But part of that answer is the Victorian Carbon Farming Project helps us remove some of the financial burden. Question? Yep.
You've got the three other advisors previously. How are you sort of working together on the what the differences are?
Yeah, good one.
Well, we're going to do a webinar together in the community so that people can do like a reverse Dragon's Den. We'll pitch. Yeah, we're not doing the pulping wood commercial timber. That's Wood for Good. And probably we're more similar to Greening Australia and they're more similar to us. And we might say, well, we're all about aggregation, and they might say they're all about previous experience and track record. So ultimately it comes down to how an individual farmer wants to work. But our appeal, we think, is don't work as an individual, work as a group, because that's where you'll have a material environmental and economic outcome. Greening Australia would be less inclined, and probably Wood for Good, but I'd have to talk to them to tell you to work with your neighbours and work with your land care group. They'll probably be used to dealing with individuals on a bilateral basis.
Thanks, Wardy. Just for those out there, the question was around the 4 RPAs, so whether we're talking to each other or not. I'll just elaborate on that, Wardy. So the shorter answer is we are talking. So we have had discussions together. As far as particularly the smaller, the 3 smaller RPAs, let's say, so Regen Farmers Mutual, and I only do that because Greening are very commercial or very big, but us, Wood for Good and Tree Project, we kind of know our scope. So, and we've got a bit of an understanding of scope. So, as Wardy mentioned, Wood for Good are very much in the for harvest category, and that's their focus. Not necessarily for us. We're happy to bring an aggregated type kind of agreement to the table there, and we've already spoken to them about that, and they're quite happy for that. But effectively, we can break it down into 3 things. So we're about getting trees in the ground and benefits for the farmer, or kind of landscape type or carbon type benefits for the farmer. And this is very loose. So if anyone's watching this back, come at me. Wood for Good, very much focused on the for harvest stuff, but they are also interested in the aggregation around that. Of course, they're going to get better benefit and better outcome out of having neighbours come together in projects, because there's less travel involved. There's less, you can bring contractors together, all that sort of stuff, and aggregate that way. And Tree Project are very much there for some of the smaller kind of areas and smaller farms. So being able to grow local and be able to kind of integrate with land care groups and others as well. So that's their kind of focus, and very much around riparian type areas and buffer areas and dams and such. So we're probably, as far as we're concerned, we're a bit more farm centric. So we want to look at how we can design for farming outcomes, whether it's stock protection, whether it's wind shear, designing for, to prevent wind shear from off crop, that sort of stuff. We're very much kind of probably in that vein. So short answer is we're talking to each other, and we do need to run that through for ourselves a bit of an assessment of the queries that we get, and we might go, actually, you're totally for more about wood for good than you are us, and so we would point you in that direction.
Is there any other questions? Otherwise, you might have earned yourself an early mark.
No, I've just got one, sorry. I'm thinking some of the landholders in our area are cautious about it. And possibly would be prepared to commit huge amounts of land in. So might end up with them sort of saying, well, you know, now this is the thing, it's not just asking about to the geographic central. So it's not it can't be. So you could end up with a situation where they're in each other, smaller clusters and big farmers. So is that going to be an issue for you, or you prepare to cross the whole CMA region? And I mean, I don't understand. I mean, clustering, I get as advantages when you actually do the planting, it's really hard to do it in the catchment. Theoretically, it's so much clustering.
Yeah.
Oh,
Okay. Yeah. So. No. So the question was around clustering or aggregation and whether we're open to doing that across the catchment, and whether we'll get worse results through clustering than we will through opening that up. Is that the distillation of the question? Yeah.
See a lot of
yeah, gotcha. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, so it's looking at the modelling and understanding the size of a project and that aggregation, and then being able to run something out on an aggregated scale. So I will throw that to Wardy, and then I've probably got something to add to that as well.
How big's the landscape is what I would argue. So if you're all in the same catchment, the same CMA, that might bind you. But we've talked about rainfall and soil type and agricultural production also being definitions of a landscape. So when I looked at the Landcare New Futures program, there were 3 different groups within North Central CMA who've put in an expression of interest to be part of that. So like we would probably work with one group, not all 3 groups concurrently, because we're better off getting a success, you know, and then modeling that success than having people all over the place. One of the things that we found with that Trap Rock group was Trap Rock's all fairly uniform, undulating environment south of the Cunningham, north of the Queensland border, west of Stanthorpe until you hit Englewood, where it starts to get out of Trap Rock and into the slopes and plains. So it was really nice to be able to go, that's a defined ecosystem type. And we got lucky in that the 14 farmers that we're working with primarily to start with in this auction for the World Economic Forum, they sit between the national park, Sundown National Park, and the Pikesdale Reserve. So there's a whole narrative that you can string together there because they can join and because they create a biodiversity corridor, that if you've got people that are aggregated financially but not necessarily co-located, you can't get that narrative in there, and then the buyers can't buy that outcome. Whereas the buyers that are lining up for that group of farmers collecting in a national park to a reserve, they're like, this is gold. You know, we've got another 180 farmers to roll that out to in the Trap Rock, the broader region. And I'd use the same philosophy here in North Central CMA. Let's get the narrative and the economics right, and then scale it, you know, out. But I wouldn't want somebody at the north and the south and the east and the west. Yeah.
I know some of those people, you know.
And that's fine. Look,
and they actually create space between please we can fix it to run down that.
Yeah, I mean, people can try and game it, but ultimately we've got to find an economic and environmental outcome. The farmer does the same. And so there'll be, you know, there'll be the chance that some of those people giving 20 hectares out of 2,500 provide bigger gaps of continuity than lots of small farmers somewhere else. We'll just have to use our heads whilst co-designing this. And if we keep our mind so open, our brain falls out, then we've kind of lost something. So yeah.
I'll just follow that up in the chat. Yeah. So I've just followed that. Sorry, just added that follow-up question to the chat, just talking about size in relation to land size and how we might go about that. And I'll just echo what Wardy said. It would be about designing that appropriately. But I suppose the other thing that we need to be realistic about is the program is not solely focused or designed on aggregation of neighbours or landholders. That's where we see the pathway, and that's what we would prefer because we know that it provides greater benefit and greater outcomes. But at the end of the day, if somebody has got 20 hectares in that area and they want a project, we can look at that, on its own merits and look to see whether that is a viable project. Yeah. The other thing I just do want to address that a little bit more, Chris, and I know we're kind of running out of time, but just going back to what Wardy was saying about how big is a landscape. We know, like when I was with LPLN and when we were kind of starting to talk about these types of projects 2 years ago, we created a project while I was still there around a landscape transaction or potential landscape transaction that has since turned into something else. But that landscape was around that kind of just north of Serpentine, just around here. But it ran from just north of Serpentine all the way up to Liaga. So it ran nearly, 80 kilometres or something. And we were looking at that as a single landscape. So the intention in that project was finding the landholders available or around or interested to sign up for that. And we knew that we weren't going to get, we needed, I think I did the back of the envelope that we needed about 80 landholders to buy into a project like that to get it off the ground, right? But we were able to do that incrementally. So it wasn't necessarily about finding all of them at the same time. If we did, we'd fall over, it wouldn't get off the ground. It was about finding those early ones that we could pilot with and we could understand and start to kind of get the framework of a project like that in order to then over a 5 or 6 or 7 year process, work our way, either, from one end to the other or, just work our way into the project. And I would then I would take, we know that there is a pretty prominent fella around this part of the world who has a great, I love it, a great vision of getting emus back into the landscape and what is it, connecting the Gunbower to the Grampians. For them, yeah. But that's the vision. That's that higher vision, and I mean that is a significant project. That's not going to happen in that person's lifetime, but that is the landscape that that's what he defines as a landscape. So, I think we can take those sorts of things on their merit. But as far as that's concerned, and as far as the outreach is concerned as well, if we look at that map, we are looking for groups, but we want them right across the catchment. We don't want to kind of target those, one particular area. Great. Okay. I'm certainly talked out. I don't know about any of you. I feel like the people online that have stuck with us are probably questioned out. So I might close us up, folks. Thanks very much for coming. I will pop anybody interested to contact us. You can contact me, and I'll pop that in the chat. But I can only do one thing at a time, seemingly right now. So yeah, if you are interested, I'll just pop us back to the lodging your interest page. So people out there, or if you want to grab a quick QR code, please do so. Do the survey. For those out there or for those here, grab a quick thing. If not, get hold of me. You can also hit the DECA website, so the Victorian Carbon Farming Program website, and our details are there as well if you'd like to catch up with us that way, or a bit more conventionally, or take anything offline. I do want to thank everybody out there and everybody here for coming, and thanks very much for your time. Hopefully it was informative for you and we didn't explode people's brains. I'd also like to thank Wardy for coming down from New South Wales. It was a big drive for you. And also Claire and Anthony for their time and coming up from Melbourne to be part of the event. Thanks very much for coming. Hopefully it was informative for you, and we can help you out and start to get some trees in the ground.